Welcome, everybody, and good morning to our session on making outstanding conference speeches. Today, we're going to be having a look at a topic which is one of those evergreen topics. It's always a challenge. How do you introduce storytelling with statistics? And today, we're going to say, maybe storytelling should be thought about before statistics. And we're going to have a deep dive into some of the challenges of just delivering conference speeches. We all know that. Welcome, everybody, and good morning to our session on making outstanding conference speeches. Today, we're going to be having a look at a topic which. So we know that one of the real challenges is keeping people's attention. Audiences just don't have an unlimited amount of time, and they've got a device in their hand that is incredibly engaging. It's enhanced with AI. You just have to assume your audience is already distracted, even when they're sitting down in a conference speech. And that's one of the big challenges today is like, how do we keep people's attention? Because if we have their attention, then they will listen to us. If they listen to us, then they might actually, benefit from some of the ideas that we have. So we're really competing with the phone. We're really competing with people's attention, those distractions. So how do we overcome that? It's not easy. It's definitely not something you're going to, get right in one talk, but there's a number of things that we can do. So here are three ideas on how to increase that impact. Relate with stories. Going to have a look at, how we can connect emotionally. That emotional connection is sort of a way of keeping people's attention. And, it can bridge data. If you're ever a good storyteller, you can actually tell the story behind the numbers. Another way is using sound bites, and we call these taglines. And if you work on crafting a sound bite, and we have a process for doing that, you can really convey complex information into shareable messages, into small, concise, shareable messages. And sometimes they stick in people's head. So we're going to have a look at how we can use sound bites. We know that companies and marketing agencies and PR firms spend a lot of time and energy on that. Well, we should be able to master that skill as well. And then finally, the delivery skills. It's a conference speech. You're on a stage. You have to bring your 8 out of 10 self. You've really got to pump up that energy to get people's attention. We know that stories connect before facts because you might forget a fact, you might forget a data point, but you're generally going to remember that story. You're going to remember the story, the message. You're going to remember some aspect of the story. And if you're able to convey, that idea or that emotion along with a data point, that's going to be something that's very memorable. So, for example, if you are presenting some market research, and of course, there's lots of data points about what consumer insights might be. But in fact, if you could just say, we went out to this small town, this small province, we're in a dusty room, and we gathered around all the mothers of the town and the village. And we asked them these questions, and there was a big thunderstorm going on outside. And here are some of those insights that we found, not in the large cities, but in the third tier towns, that is incredibly useful for your brand. That's a different way of setting up a data pack, and you can use a combination of these. So really connect with stories as you're using that data. A simple story beats 10 slides. So that's a great thing about a story. Some presenters won't use slides, and I think that's very impressive. In conference speaking, it might be a good idea to have at least a backdrop of slides, to use maybe more visuals over text, and to really add in those examples. How long should a story be? So Jack Ma is an example here we use from Alibaba, one of China's first global CEO. And he was great at sort of adding in anecdotes and little stories, particularly from his past, from his experience. And they're quite short. So when you're practicing a story, you'll find that the first draft is going to be quite long. It's going to ramble a little bit. You're not really have a point to it. But what I'd encourage you to do is to really, with your timer, edit it down. And you can use GPT to help you, do a first draft yourself. So speak it out. This can be as long as you like. put it into GBT and say, hey, use as much verbatim words there as you can. Give me a 2 or 3 minute script. And then again, have a look and then sort of like see if you can come back in and put that into your own words. So you can use thinking tools like GBT to help you get down to that 1 to 2 minute length, because anything longer than 2 minutes is going on a little bit. Under 1 minute might be a little bit short. So that's something just to think about, that 1 to 2 minute range. So how do you do that in a business context? Here are some examples. Pick a client or a turning point. Case studies are a great way to share. Sort of, in my experience, here's a client in the similar industry to you. Here's a client from a similar background. Here's a client who had a similar set of pain points. That can be a way to bring your audience into your story. So you have to make sure the story is a good fit for the audience. Now, if the audience is quite diverse, well, then you can't be really, really specific, right? You have to sort of make it a little bit more general to try and get it at that level. Or if you do use a very specific example, the message itself should be more relatable. So thinking of, like, those highs, those lows, those success stories that you can share from your client's experiences always are really insightful, because these would be stories that the audience generally haven't heard. They haven't heard your experiences. So it can be quite powerful. Number two, start with the challenge. So, people like to know what's the challenge, what's the conflict. All good storytelling, if you watch a good movie, within the first couple of minutes, there'll be a challenge. You might see the idyllic family life. Oh, everything looks so perfect. It looks lovely. But the movie is not going to go on about a perfect life, because that would be very boring. No one would watch that. And then suddenly there's a challenge. What is that challenge? That challenge should be relatable to the audience. So again, this is where you need to do your homework. What's going on in the minds of the audience? What are they worried about? What are they frustrated about? What's on their minds? So talk to people before your conference speech, and they can really just give you those pain points to focus on. And then finally, end with the breakthrough. So, we like to close the loop in a story, to really make sure that people feel, okay, well, there was a challenge and you did ABC, and there was a solution. Or maybe it was a failure, but we learned something and we grew and we improved from there. So really, thinking about that 1, 2, 3 there, have a turning point, start with the challenge, end with a breakthrough, end with that energy, is something that, can be really powerful. But at the heart of this, challenges, breakthroughs, pain points must be relatable for this audience. You've got to do your homework there to get that right. There's so much information that you could share with an audience. You have a lot of experience, you have a lot of ideas, you're a subject matter expert. You could spend all day talking to the audience. But in a conference speech, you might have 20 minutes, maybe 40 minutes to share that. So, I use an analogy in the 1 minute presenter. It's like trying to shove a large melon of information at your listeners. They're going to resist. Nobody wants to eat the whole melon. They'd much prefer that tiny slice that refreshes on those hot days. So think about, what is a slice of information? What is a slice of my knowledge that I could share with this audience where they go, interesting. Maybe I'll have another slice, and ask them for, makes them wanting more. And that's something that is very, very important to think about. If you feel you have a technical audience, and sometimes people will say to me, they say, Warwick, well, look, my audience is very technical. They want all the information. They want the data. I would make a pack. I would make something that people could request after the presentation. You could put a QR code in your presentation so that they can connect with you, so that they can follow up, they can download something, give people that access to that information if they want it. But a conference talk should be much higher level. Conference speaking is about ideas. How do you make your idea stick? You've got to have a soundbite. You've got to have a message. You've got to have a tagline that basically sums up what this message is all about. So, for example, my first book, The 1 Minute Presenter, you think of the subline, the subheading or subtitle of a book is really that soundbite. So the 1 Minute Presenter is 8 steps to successful business presentations in a short attention span world. So you know what you're going to get. You're going to get 8 steps to do what? deliver successful business presentations. Why? Because we live in a short attention span world. So that's an idea that sticks. Some people might remember the number eight. Some people might remember, oh, business presentation, that's helpful for me. Other people might remember, oh, short attention span, that's really relevant for me too. So one of the things I do a lot with my clients, and I think there's a great opportunity here for you to move from data and information into messaging, is really like using taglines. And I believe taglines should be about 8 words, 6 to 8 words. Why? Firstly, it's easy for you to remember. If something's 16 words, it's quite difficult for you to remember as a speaker. If it's difficult for you to remember as a speaker, it's going to be pretty difficult for the audience to remember too. 6 to 8 words. You might say, well, look, what about just do it? That's really good. Sure. 3 words is good if you've got $1 billion advertising budget. But again, if it's fewer words, it tends to become quite generic. So like trusted partner and building relationships, these are fine, but they're generic, they're vanilla. So an idea will stick if you can say something in 6 to 8 words. So get the concept, kind of like try and sum it up in, I use an exercise where we start with 64 words. So tell me, what are you trying to say on this slide in 64 words? And that's quite easy to do. You can explain it all out. It's a lot of information. And then, I used to do this exercise with pencil and paper. If you can use GBT again to use this as a thinking exercise. GBT is good because you can generate a lot of different variations. You can say to GBT, okay, great, let's go from 64 to 32 to 16 to 8. From 16 to 8, you say, like, no, give me 10 different versions. And then again, that could just help with your thinking. I would recommend when using GBT, don't use it as an output generator. So don't take what it's giving you and then use that. Use it as a thinking partner. And it's great for simplifying ideas. It's great for generating alternatives. And that can really speed up and enhance. Because you might say, look, I'm not an advertising executive. I'm not from marketing. I'm quite a technical person. I find it quite difficult to come up with sound bites. And that's fair enough. But you can describe or you can speak in, your idea in 64 words and then boil that down. So each slide should have a 6 to 8 word soundbite. You could make that the headline, the title of the slide, or you could just use it as something that you'll drop in. So we really want to go from data dumping to sound bites. So an example here, extensive research shows 73% of consumers prefer brands using sustainable practices, focusing on packaging and transparent supply chains. After a soundbite sustainably sells, I don't like that. That's too short. How could we work on that? So what are some of the key ideas in that? 73% of consumers, that's quite a high number. What do? They prefer brands. That's important, that preference. Sustainable is in there. What is it about the sustainable? Packaging and transparent supply chain. So maybe you could have something like sustainable packaging sells brands better. Something like that. That would be one version. Or, consumers prefer brands with sustainable practices. Consumers prefer brands with a transparent supply chain. Consumers buy brands with sustainable packaging. So what we're trying to do in the tagline or the soundbite stage, we're not going to get it right first time. Let's just keep generating lots of ideas. And you can do that like I'm doing, just on the fly. You can use GBT, you can use a combination of both. So basically, ultimately, you're going to come up with something where you're going to have a final tagline. That is your message. Maybe your message is something like, your brand must have sustainable packaging to be competitive. Might be a bit long, but something like that. So it depends on what you really want to get across. So this is a great exercise where you take a step back from the data and you say, what am I trying to say here? What is the message? One of the techniques I like to use here is like, if I could explain the message to a 10-year-old or an 8-year-old, they should be able to understand it. Now, in the word here, if you explain this to a 10-year-old, they might not understand what sustainability is. That's okay, I think, for the audience. We don't need to dumb it down too much. But again, you don't want to have too much jargon. If there's like a lots of jargon, then it's not going to be memorable. So if you do have some younger members in your family, you can test out your taglines on them. Delivery, when you're on the stage, we're talking about a conference speech, you've got that platform, try and get, away from the lectern, try and be able to, to use that space as much as you can. Of course, eye contact, depending on the size of the room, you should be making eye contact with blocks of people, so the left and the middle and the right, the front, the middle and the back, block out people in the audience. If it's a large audience, say a few hundred, you can take blocks. If it's a small audience, you can sort of like, do a scan and sort of like as you're going through, just speak certain sections, like a thought or two to one individual. What you'll see when you're making a connection, if you are speaking to someone with that eye contact, they'll look at you. So maybe if they're playing with their phone, if they'll notice that you're looking at them, you're speaking to them, they will look at you, and maybe they'll nod, or they'll smile, or they'll have some sort of human connection. If you get that, that's brilliant, because you should be looking to do that throughout your presentation. Movement, if you are going to move, you can think about the stage like theatre do. If you have three sections to your presentation, maybe there's different parts of the stage that you use for different parts of the presentation, the beginning, the middle, and the end. Or if you're talking about consumers over here, maybe you move to that stage, that part of the stage. Or when you're talking about investors, you come over here and you talk about this stage. And then what you can do throughout the presentation, you can refer to that part of the stage, and then people know, oh, you're talking about consumers, oh, you're talking about investors. So you can really use this idea of space to to help people follow along, and it keeps people engaged in the presentation. Vocal variety, the main one for a conference speech is use a microphone. If it's any size of audience, like 50, 100, please use a microphone. Don't be the presenter that says, oh, is my voice loud enough? I don't need to use a microphone. You always need to use a microphone. Get there early, test it. Do you want a handheld? Better to have a clip on. Really make sure it works with your outfit, where you're going to attach it to. Do that prep ahead of time. The meeting organizer will really appreciate it too. A conference speech is a performance. It is a little bit of entertainment. It's a little bit of fun. People want to be engaged. They want to sort of like the experience to be memorable. So people are willing you on to have a good experience. So I think it's always when you've done your preparation, you've got your content and you know your message, and now you're thinking about delivery, you can think about how can I, have highs and lows, and how can I make this an experience? And the best conference speech will have some energy, running through it, some high points, some frustrating points, the release at the end. So you can really think about how you're managing that energy, like you would if you were creating a movie or a book or a character. That's sort of the next level of conference presenting, where you really turn it into an experience. You believe, look, yes, I'm delivering insights and content and updates, but it's an experience that people are going to remember. So today we've had a look at that idea of like telling a story, telling your stories. We gave the example of like your clients, the turning points, the breakthroughs, those sorts of things. We explored this idea of taglines, and taglines are a wonderful way to take data and turn it into a message. It's a very systematic process that you can use if you're a technical person. And I shared ways to use that with GBT. I love making taglines. It's one of my superpowers. I always enjoyed coming up with like that. What are you trying to say here on the entire presentation, on each slide? What should the audience think about you? What's your message as a presenter? And then finally, the delivery. We don't have to go too dramatic on this, but we want to try and make it an experience. We want to have some stage craft when we're on the conference speech. It will really make you stand out as a business presenter. If they remember you, they'll remember the message. So what does that mean? Well, one of the things that I notice people, even when they come up with a tagline, they forget to repeat it. So one of the things you want to have, particularly for your overall tagline for your presentation, is you want to repeat that throughout the presentation. So you are becoming the message of the presentation. What is that message? If they remember you, then they remember the presentation. You, for this particular 30 minutes or 40 minutes, You are the message. You've got to be very coherent. You've got to be very aligned. If it's a serious topic, you don't want to be too high energy and optimistic and upbeat. Like if it is something that requires a little bit more groundedness, a little bit more engagement. So being authentic, being aligned to the energy that you have to deliver is incredibly important. So crafting your story, work on that 2 minutes. It's a loop, it's a cycle you got to go through. No one delivers a brilliant 2 minute story off the bat. It's something you got to practice. But now you've got a way to do that. Work on those sound bites. Go back in a past presentation and look at it and say, okay, well, what would be the message or the tagline for each of these slides and go through it. The extra benefit is like when you think of a deck, let's say you have 20 slides in your deck, you got 20 sound bites. Now you can actually see, does this presentation make sense in terms of the messaging that I'm delivering? Maybe you need to move the slides around. When you get a good flow of the message, it's very easy to remember the presentation. So now you don't need to use notes. You don't need to turn around and look at the screen, which you definitely don't want to do in a conference speech. So you become more accomplished. You can command the room without slides, which I think is an incredibly important point of your presence and your ability to influence the audience. So hope you enjoyed the presentation today. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. We'll continue this series of how to give amazing conference speeches, and I look forward to speaking with you soon. Thanks, everybody. Have a good day. Bye bye.